My name is Erica Walker, and I'm a doctoral candidate at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And my dissertation is looking at the relationships between sound exposure and negative health. But for today's topic, and so I can graduate at sometime soon, I'm going to focus on the exposure aspect. So while I am a budding environmental epidemiologist, I'm going to focus on the sound exposure modeling and how I think that we can move beyond the A-weighted decibel and looking at these relationships between noise and health, or sound and health, sorry. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to present a revised community noise model, and I'm going to talk about my sound monitoring and my noise surveys that I've conducted for the past year. And I'm going to briefly talk about a comprehensive community noise report that was just released 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to talk about some of the results I've seen, not only from the models I've created, but also some specific results from East Boston. So I measured at 400 sites in the Boston area, but I also took a special look at East Boston. Okay, this revised community model of noise and negative health, I think that when we look at the relationship between sound and health, we have to think about sound as being an experience. And it is that experience that brings about any negative health. So while I feel like, we capture the sound pressure level, there are some things that we fail to capture that I think are important in modifying and mediating the negative health effects. So in particular, I feel like there's a pathway, and I feel like we need to capture that whole experience before we can actually talk about the relationship between sound and health. In my dissertation work, I am specifically interested in the frequency component of sound, because we know that we have the sound level, but sound feels different. Different sounds actually feel different. And I'm very interested in that feeling because I'm very interested in the experience of sound. So what I've been doing for the past 5 years is analyzing the frequency spectrum of sound, community sound in the Boston community. So not only am I interested in the frequency component because I feel like that part of the sound experience is important in the health outcome, I'm also interested in the sound perception, how people actually perceive the sound level that they're exposed to. So I'm going to talk about those two main things today. I'm just going to kind of briefly go through this, but there is epidemiological evidence that suggests that noise is bad news. Starting as low as 40 decibels, we see a change in mood. And like I said, 40 decibels is probably about the sound of a quiet office. So we see there that we already begin to see things like annoyance levels. However, if we move higher up, 65 decibels, which is what I routinely measured standing in front of a busy road, we get more, I would say, more negative health impacts, such as a negative cardiovascular activity and mental health effects. And like I said, we can go back over this slide if you guys have questions about this. I have a few issues with the current noise metrics that are used in epidemiological studies. I think, for one thing, they assume what noise is. I mean, so they assume noise, they ignore perception, and they use a metric that discounts lower and higher frequencies, in particular the A-weighted decibel. And by doing that, by only reporting the A-weighted decibel or using that as the metric to make the associations between sound exposure and health, I feel like that assumption that the auditory system is the only pathway, it assumes that the auditory system is the only pathway that we process noise, and I don't agree with that. I like this quote from one of the survey respondents. He was like, "There's some noise I hear and some noise that I feel." And I think that's that's just a great quote to kind of talk about how we need to start thinking about sound as an experience. So for the past 2 years, I have been conducting the Greater Boston Area Sound Project. I want to make a few disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that there's nobody in my back pocket. This has just been a self-funded study. I guess what is in my back pocket is just a curiosity about what this community noise experience is. I am interested in community noise. I do understand that aircraft noise is a part of the community noise soundscape, but I'm also interested in other types of sound as well. So while I will present a few results from the East Boston study, which looks at, primarily aircraft noise, this is a community noise project. And I think that's all the disclaimers that I wanted to let you guys just to be aware of. So the first goal was to, actually the other disclaimer is that the models that I build are not propagation models. They are very fancy propagation models that can predict noise levels. But these are models that look at what's in our environment that is influencing the sound levels in our environment. So the first goal was to actually build a spatial temporal model of sound exposure in the greater Boston area, not only the typically reported 8-weighted decibel, but also creating models of sound exposure across the frequency spectrum. So I've looked at infrasound, which is defined as sound levels between 1 and 20 hertz, low frequency noise. I forgot to put the slide that told you the breakdown. Actually, I have it on one of the some of my outputs, but low frequency noise, mid frequency noise, and high frequency noise, and I'll give you the decibel ranges when we look at the results. So the second result was to build a socioeconomic and spatial model looking at the determinants of community noise perception, and then to create a comprehensive noise report for the greater Boston area. And this report was released 2 weeks ago, and it's just a general summary of what we've seen so far, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So these are the 400 sites that I monitored noise at, or sound at, excuse me. Sound was monitored for varying levels, for ranging from 10 minutes to a week. But the sound metric that was used was based over the period of a 10-minute period. But I have measured sound at varying times at varying places. And in particular in East Boston, these are the spots in East Boston. So I did 65 sites in East Boston, and like I said, we'll look at the results of those in just a minute. Actually, we're going to look at them now. Okay. So just looking at a summary of all of the sound data in the city of Boston, we can see that, low frequency, so I looked at 4 different sound metrics: low frequency noise, which is defined, like overall, I only looked at infrasound in East Boston, but low frequency noise, which is defined as the center frequencies from 25 to 125 hertz. Mid-frequency sound, which are the center frequencies between 250 and 1,000 hertz, and high-frequency sound, which is the summation of the center frequencies from 2,000 to 16,000 hertz. And then I kind of contrasted that with the 8-weighted decibel. So, the main takeaway here, I think there's 2 main ones. The first one is that there's a huge difference between the low frequency noise, which is of particular interest to me, and what the 8-weighted decibel is currently capturing. And the next one is that just regardless of what metric that you're using, if we look at the WHO standards for acceptable day and nighttime sound levels everywhere in the city, it's ridiculously higher. That I think those are the 2 main takeaways. So these are just summary statistics. I'll show you the model results in just a minute. So the first table is overall, but if we look at what's happening in East Boston, actually in East Boston I was able to capture infrasound as well. You see a similar story, but you see again these higher levels of sound in these lower frequency ranges. Unfortunately, there's very little out there in the epidemiological literature in particular that we can get some kind of hold on what does this actually mean. So I've observed these higher levels and I've observed where these higher levels are occurring in the city, but what does this information mean? That's part of the ongoing question. What does this mean for our health? What does this mean for our sound experience? Okay, so I apologize, this is a huge table, but we looked at some spatial and temporal variables in the city of Boston, and we wanted to see which of those spatial and temporal variables were driving the sound level, not only the typically reported A-weighted sound level, but also the low, mid, and high frequency sound level ranges. So the ones in red are the statistically significant predictors of these sound levels. And I think that just the table overall is just really interesting to look at, in the sense that there are different drivers of different sound and the different frequencies, and it kind of just calls into question, is what we're using and where we're using it capturing the whole picture? So for example, I'm just gonna, like there's a lot of information here, and I'm more than willing to share this information with you. But for example, if you're looking at buses, like for example, we considered land use, lengths of buses, rail lines, roads, counts of all kinds of things, from buildings to big box stores to entertainment establishments, restaurant establishments, distances to things that create sound, road conditions. We have a socioeconomic neighborhood factors. I can discuss it if you have questions on things. I'm just kind of running through things because for the sake of time, we have, I did monitoring for a year, so we have seasonal characteristics, meteorological conditions, and like temporal conditions, vegetation. So we just considered a lot of different factors. And like I was saying, the interesting thing is that different things affect different frequency ranges differently. So for example, if you're living in a community that is inundated with bus routes, which is true for Roxbury in particular, is reporting the A-weighted sound level in a community like Roxbury, is that an accurate description of the sound experience in that area? Because bus routes heavily influenced and statistically influenced the low frequency sound levels, but we didn't see that same impact in mid-frequency sound, high-frequency sound, or A-weighted sound. So to me, it's just like, are we using this A-weighted decibel to the detriment of the sound experience in communities? And like I said, I can share this information with you. This is just kind of like the model. These are the model results. So that is the, oh, actually, sorry. There's one more thing here. So this is the models of the spatial and temporal relationships between the typically reported A-weighted sound and sound across the frequency ranges. But I also looked at spatial predictors of sound perception, and this comes from the survey that I administered for the past year. It's called the Greater Boston Neighborhood Noise Survey. It's a convenient sample. It's not a random sample survey, but from these responses, there were close to 1,200 responses. I wanted to look at what are some of these spatial and socioeconomic predictors that influence a person's perception about the sound level in their community. And there were some really interesting findings there in terms of predictors of sound perception, community sound perception, which was it was ascertained by asking them, well, how loud do you rate your neighborhood? And so we found significant predictors like age, the percentage of minorities in the neighborhood, and the percentage of interesting land use characteristics such as if the percentage of land use in that neighborhood that's devoted to spectator recreation, bus stops, and restaurants were things that really influenced their perception of loudness in their neighborhood. This is an ongoing model. This isn't a final model, but for me, it served as kind of like a platform to answer further questions about sound perception. Okay, so that's basically what I'm working on for the past 5 years. Of particular interest to me, I consider myself to be a community researcher, and one of the most important parts of my research is to make sure that it doesn't happen in a vacuum and that the community is constantly updated about what I'm doing. And so as a result of that, I just recently released the 2016 Greater Boston Noise Report, and it's sort of a summary of all of the findings that I've found so far, minus the sound models. But information on this website includes interactive spatial maps of some of the sound level metrics that I've developed. So we look at eight-weighted sound during the day and evening. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, thank you. So, you know, maps of eight-weighted sound, unweighted sound, and kind of like this difference between unweighted and eight-weighted sound, which to me is particularly interesting because I am theorizing here in areas where that difference is really huge, these darker areas here. Again, maybe this eight-weighted sound level is not what we should be using to capture the sound experience. In addition to that, I have detailed all of our survey results, so you can go there to see information on the demographics, the response to perception questions. We've created noise complaint maps from the noise complaints from the city of Boston for the past year. We give an analysis of the health impacts, that self-reported health impacts, and we offer up a few noise abatement strategies. And then we also created these sound perception maps that came from the survey results. So in particular, this is the aircraft annoyance levels map, and it has some pretty interesting results. You check that out and come up with your own conclusions. But we look at annoyances from horns, leaf blowers, self-reported sound sensitivity, road traffic, street level, trains, you name it, we've mapped it. And then the one thing that I really liked putting together was Greater Boston's first noise report card. So basically using the information that we ascertained from the models, we've kind of created these big bucket categories of grading the soundscape in each of the Boston neighborhoods. So for each of the Boston neighborhoods, unfortunately due to some of the sample sizes and some of the neighborhoods, we had to collapse neighborhoods, but we rate and grade the soundscape in the Boston neighborhoods. And you can see our first place winner was Hyde Park in Mattapan, which has the quietest soundscape in the city. You know, of course, there are limitations to this, but I think that we need to push the envelope in terms of tools that we can use to get people to think about the sound experience in the neighborhoods. And then, in addition to that, we created a series of case studies of people in the neighborhood. So we went around and are currently interviewing different people, and we're asking them about the sound levels in their community. So, you know, these are just selected profiles, but we interview them, we measure the sound level in their community, and we actually have audio recordings of sound levels in their community. So you can read their interview, you can read about their thoughts about sound levels in their community, and you can actually hear how their community sounds. And then we just also offer a rotating gallery of, you know, sounds in your community that either drive you crazy or make you feel like your community is home. And so that's basically the major parts of the sound report. So I would just like to thank my dissertation committee who have been awesome and fearless in supporting this typically non-supported field. You know, a lot of people just view sound and noise are just things that you get over or just annoyances, but they really don't take the time to really examine the sound experience and how it may impact your health. And I would just like to thank especially the city of Somerville, who was really instrumental in getting the word out about the survey. I really appreciate that. And if you would like to view the actual noise report, you can go to boston.noiseinthecity.org and see all of our findings.